are live, theoretically. Yep, here we go. We're up and streaming, hopefully. If you're not familiar with what this is, I'm part of Nerdologists.com. We talk about a ton of different nerdy things, and this is a little dark. Let me get the light. There we go. That's more like it, hopefully. But we talk about a ton of different nerdy things on our website, as well as we have an actual play Dungeons and Dragons game. So kind of branching off of that, I wanted to start doing some character creations, and thus far I've done the main non-Hobbit characters in Lord of the Rings, as well as Gambit, and I started on the Defenders recently thanks to the suggestion from one of my Twitter followers, who's also a big RPG guy. So before I jump into that and kind of go through Jessica Jones for you here, let me talk quickly about a catacon. I did this before the Monster Madness video as well. I want to continue to encourage people to go to a catacon. A catacon is a blast. It's a small RPG convention put on by the RPG Academy in Dayton, Ohio. Last year, I think there were about 350 something people there, something like that. And it's an absolute blast. You get to try all sorts of different RPGs. There are tons of games that are run. I'll be running a couple of games, still figuring out what games exactly. But consider coming. This Kickstarter is for just help them get a good chunk of money right up front. And so they can kind of gauge the interest for it. If they get this money, they will make enough money to be able to do it, hopefully. But as you can see, this has gone quite well. I was talking about it last Thursday, and I think that might have been the first day it was up, and it was almost at 50% that first day. It's added about 2,000 since then, and should make its goal of 10,000. But if you want discounted tickets, this is the way to do it. It's an awesome con. I can't stress that enough. You get to meet a bunch of cool RPG creators, podcasters, streamers, stuff like that. Definitely, if you're interested in RPGs, this is a really good way to try a number of different systems without spending a lot of your own money on the books. But enough of that, let's hop over to Jessica Jones. So most people probably know Jessica Jones from the Netflix series. Even I wasn't all that familiar with her prior to that. So let's talk a little bit about Jessica Jones. So just some of the backstory is she got her powers when, I believe it was on the way back from a trip, or to Disney World, or from Disney World, not sure. Her family's car crashed into a military vehicle that was carrying top secret chemicals, and her whole family died, and she gets superpowers. It's very Marvel-like to do that. So her superpowers, which she didn't manifest immediately, are she can fly and she has super strength. However, she can't fly all that well. She's out of practice for it, and she, story-wise, tends to keep a fairly low profile about her superpowers and stuff like that. She actually works as a investigator. So you're going to see that kind of with my build for Jessica Jones. So let's talk a little bit about my build here. It's an interesting build in the fact that I kind of had to mess with a few things to really be able to build Jessica Jones the way you would think that she is kind of in the comics. The strength is a massive key to her, and likewise intelligence, which I think I'm going to actually tweak this live right now on the fly. Drop that by 1. Drop that by 1. Go down to 18. The reason I have intelligence high is because of that investigative background. I'm going to bump this up to 16 and becomes a +3. So we can adjust that number to 3, and we'll give her an extra 5 hit points for however many levels she would have had with that. The reason I did that is she's not sure that she can stop a bullet, but she thinks that she probably can. So let's name her as well. Jessica Jones. I would give her a neutral good. Forgot to do some of these things. Neutral good, alignment. She's generally going to want to do what's good. But as you can see, I've continued kind of with the... have to adjust something else. I had originally built her slightly differently than she is now. So I went with monk simply because in the description of Jessica Jones on the Marvel wiki, basically, you can see she's reasonably skilled detective and a hand-to-hand combatant. So she has high intelligence, not super high wisdom to get that hand-to-hand combat, or get that reasonably skilled detective, and her hand-to-hand combat is going to be primarily based off of strength. So it's +11 to hit, really nice, and 1d6 +5 damage, plus sneak attack. So it's all about being able to punch through stuff for her. If we look at her super ability section, she can lift an automobile with no discernible effort, enhanced level of resistance to physical injury. She's not sure if she's bulletproof. She can fly, but she's out of practice. So I could have gone a fairly similar build to Luke Cage, but I wanted to really focus in on that investigative side. So I actually went 12 levels of rogue to allow myself to get 2 things of expertise. You can see very high history, insight, investigation, and perception. So she's going to be able to check out things. Reliable talent even in investigation, so she can't roll less than 10. So instead of having that damage resistance that Luke Cage has, she ends up having evasion and uncanny dodge, which allows her to have half damage in certain situations. So there are some other abilities that you would kind of expect to be seeing, since this is very similar to what I did for Luke Cage, where he heals a little bit. However, and I'd probably actually give her that skill as well. Stillness of mind, I think. Heal, or as an action, heal up to, what would that be, 24? Yeah, 24 HP once for a long rest. So I'm going to give her that ability. Again, I'm not sure I have the name quite right, but what I did instead was I gave her, instead of some of the abilities, I gave her a flight ability. Since she can fly, according to comic book lore. Let me zoom in so it's a little bit easier to read. However, she's not supposed to be all that great at flying. She's out of practice. So I gave her a wisdom saving throw. Not going to be her best thing. Yeah, I would say wisdom makes the most sense. And a DC 12 for that to be able to fly. Since her saving throw, well, it won't be a wisdom saving throw. Excuse me, wisdom check. Her wisdom modifier is a 0, so over half the time she's not going to be able to fly. But sometimes she will be able to. That's kind of how I got around the fact that I would have to make her another race or come up with a reason why she could fly. So as I was talking about some of the other things, I mean, we're familiar with the monk's abilities here. We have Flurry of Blows, allows you to spend a key point to do 2 unarmed strikes instead of 1. As a bonus action, Patient Defense, take the dodge action for a key point as a bonus. Step of the Wind, disengage or dash as a bonus action. I could actually remove this right now from the list because you're never going to do that. If you want to spend an action or spend a bonus action to do that, you can do that with Cunning action, which you get from being a rogue. So like I said, the main reason I went with rogue was to get that expertise. There are a couple other things that you can get from rogue. Fast hands. I'm basically saying like she has investigator tools which she can use to investigate as a bonus action, disarm a trap, open a lock, something like that. Supreme Sneak, if you move less than half your movement. And Stillness of Mind, use an action to end a frightened effect. This actually is supposed to have charm effect on there as well. But that doesn't make sense in terms of Jessica Jones's story. So one part of Jessica Jones's story is that she runs afoul of the Purple Man, played by David Tennant in the show. But the Purple Man basically releases a pheromone that makes people become his thrall. If you wanted to do it in D&D terms, you just kind of come up with a vampire type ability to get someone to be a thrall and use that. So if it's basically a charm effect of some sort. So if you have Stillness of Mind, then and you can use it to get rid of a charm effect, that really weakens the Purple Man, doesn't make him all that much of a threat to her. So instead, I just dropped that off simply because I think one of the most powerful abilities you can have in D&D, and really in probably most RPGs, unless everybody can do it, is having the ability to fly. If you are able to stay in the air and out of range, especially of grapplers, melee weapon users, stuff like that, you can be fairly effective. Now, in all fairness, she's a martial arts expert or hand-to-hand combat user, so she's going to use her fists, which means she has to be in close, but it would allow her to kind of flit in and out of danger. So let's talk about some of her personality traits and stuff like that. I'm actually going to recommend, for an idea of how to play her in many ways, go listen to faculty meeting number 107 from the RPG Academy, the people who put on a Catacon, which actually talks about playing vulnerable characters. because that is one thing that Jessica Jones is she's a very, like, for as physically strong as she is, she's a vulnerable character who has, as I said, a flaw, and it's really not a flaw, it's just something that you can lean into. That's, when I look at a flaw, I think more about like stuff that's not going to be advantageous to your D&D game. And so you can lean into the fact that what she went through with the Purple Man was just horrific abuse, basically. Like, if you want to see the wording here, subjecting her to physical and mental humiliation in imagined retaliation for his defeats by other superheroes. So, like, the scarring that she has is going to be impressive from that, and it's going to be tricky in a D&D game. So for that, she also likes to keep a lower profile, which is one of the personality traits that I gave her, simply because if she can keep a lower profile, she's less likely to run into something that kind of triggers her for that. And so her ideals are that I have there are for that she does want to help people. This comes from a sense of guilt, wanting to help people, but also from a sense of she doesn't want anybody else to have to deal with what she's had to on any level. So she always is going to help people. She's going to help people. And she has bonds to her family and her city. So in the comic books, she's in a relationship or possibly married to, I don't remember for sure which, Luke Cage at this point in time. I think married, and they have a kid together. Now, going through here, we can just go, no relatives. Yes, married. You can see somewhere down in here where she was seeing Ant-Man and then got knocked up by Luke Cage during that time. And so for that, that is a really strong bond, her family and her city to her. But her bond isn't as much of almost a weakness. Well, it's a weakness for Luke Cage, where he is very concerned about his wife and his child, which, I mean, I would say probably rightfully so. But for her, instead, that's the reason why she goes out and fights. She'll leave, I'm trying to remember, I think it was the New Avengers comics that were out about 4 years ago. Squirrel Girl is actually her babysitter for their child, and she'll go out and fight as well, even though Luke doesn't want her to. So often she'll follow behind them and then show up when needed. So it's an interesting build, fairly tricky in some ways to do, because as compared to like Luke Cage, who has, it's very much about his physicality, and coming up ones like Iron Fist, it's about his martial arts abilities and some abilities beyond that. And then Daredevil, I mean, he's a lawyer, but he has very strong combat abilities and styles that you can kind of build easier into a D&D character. With Jessica Jones, it's much trickier in many ways because of the fact that she wants to take that back seat. She is a lesser known hero in many ways, whereas like there's been a comic book with Luke Cage and the Iron Fist. It tends to be less comic books where that predominantly feature Jessica Jones. So I just have a little less knowledge on her because of that. So I really tried to lean into that investigative side. Like even now in the comics, apparently she's works for the Daily Bugle as their supernatural reporter, this sort of thing. But that still can lean into that investigative side of things. So I feel comfortable with how I've built her. It's just not as easy a build in a game that really wants you to focus on combat and combat skills. And so the mental stats like intelligence or wisdom or charisma are really supposed to be more based on if you're a spellcaster, so you can use your spells in combat. She's not a spellcaster, she's an investigator, and I wanted to kind of lean into that so I didn't end up with a bunch of really similar builds. So give everyone kind of their place in the Defenders, because in many ways, just thinking about the Defenders, like Daredevil is kind of a striker but also probably the face. Jessica Jones is in many ways like the investigative background, like that's kind of her niche. Luke Cage is definitely the strongman of the situation, and the Iron Fist is kind of the impetuous striker type. I mean, you can really break them down kind of A-Team style if you wanted to for that sort of thing, where let's pull up the A-Team. Let's do the movie. Yeah. So, Daredevil would be the Hannibal of the group. Kind of that older, a little bit wiser type. Iron Fist would be the face of the group. Now, face probably thinks he's more of a face than he is, but kind of that cocky swagger thing. Luke Cage, B.A. Baracus, and that leaves Jessica Jones as the Murdoch, which I actually think is a really apt kind of comparison, where someone who's a little crazy, a little bit unstable, still is smart, but you're never 100% sure of exactly what they're going to do. And with Jessica Jones, I feel like that's an accurate description of who she is. So with that, this is a little bit shorter than sometimes, but I don't have much else to say on Jessica Jones. Some of it simply I don't have that wealth of knowledge that I do compared to, say, in particular, Luke Cage and Daredevil. So I'll be back next Tuesday with the Iron Fist. If you have any ideas of other Marvel, D&D, like any sort of tropes, any type of thing that you want to see built, please let me know. I'll try and build them. Otherwise, I mean, if you want to hear some fun builds and really random builds, check out Total Party Thrill. Total Party Thrill is a podcast. One of the hosts, at least, probably just one, who knows, will be coming to a Catacon. But at the end of every episode of their podcast, they do Character Forge, I think is what they call it, where they go through and build different archetypes, different types of character, and they've done some Marvel characters in that as well, or just very interesting characters. Anyways, with that, please let me know if there's anything you want me to build. If you have something that pops into your head, you can tweet at me, either personally at me at the Scando, or at the Nerdologists Twitter handle, which is at NerdologistCast, or you can leave a comment on Facebook, where you can find us by searching for Nerdologists. So with that, I will wrap up for today.